Dear Mr. Ambassador, members of the French Embassy staff, family, and friends, becoming a Knight of the French Legion of Honor is the greatest honor you can bestow upon me. This was made possible only by the courage of the men who fought under me during World War II. We were a combat engineer platoon attached to the 10th Infantry Regiment, and the 10th Infantry Regiment was part of the 5th Infantry Division, and we were the point of the 3rd Army under the control of General George Patton. My platoon consisted of 55 men when we landed in Normandy, and at the war's end, only 12 of us survived, which made it necessary for me to get replacements twice, once in France and once in Luxembourg. Our major objective was to enable the infantry to make river crossings, and in addition, we had to clear minefields and any other obstacles that impeded the advance of the 10th Combat Team. Fighting all the way from Normandy through to Czechoslovakia, we made 25 river crossings, mostly under fire, covering 2,300 miles. We employed assault boats to cross the river, and we built rafts, small bridges, and to transport jeeps, trucks, artillery, and tanks. The two most strategic battles for us in France were the battles for Angers and Metz. And in Metz it included Fort Driant, which I can tell you was an impregnable fortress. In Angers, we captured a tactical railroad bridge intact. Men of the 10th Infantry Regiment, under cover of darkness at night, crossed the river and killed all the Germans that were supposed to blow up the bridge using a railroad car in the middle of the bridge filled with explosives. My armored car bulldozer driver then rode on the railroad tracks with his armored bulldozer and very carefully pushed the railroad car off the bridge so that the bridge had no chance of exploding. For this, he received a Silver Star for bravery. Meanwhile, we planked the railroad tracks, which made it possible for the 10th Combat Team to cross the river and capture Angers. In Angers, we captured an SS headquarters which housed a prison. We freed all the French prisoners, but one stayed with us and fought with us until his home in Paris was liberated. His name was Jacques d'Orléans, an artist who lived in Montmartre section of Paris. He promised me the time of my life if ever I got to Paris. In the Battle of Metz, my platoon and I broke into the impregnable Fort Driant. We placed a Bangalore torpedo under the outer fence, pushing each section of the torpedo until it reached an outer door. When we got to the outer door, after we exploded the Bangalore torpedo, it cleared the minefield that was between the fence and the fort itself. And that gave us a safe path to get to the door. We then placed a beehive charge on the door and blew the door open, and we actually got into the fort, but we were only in one room of the fort. We then tried to get into the rest of the fort, and we tried to blow a steel door open to get into the rest of it. The beehive charge we used for the outer door just scratched that steel door. We just couldn't get in. It was so thick. Unfortunately, we didn't realize that TNT exploding in a confined room produces poisonous gas. because we used them all out in the open all the time. Therefore, we had to put on our gas masks and make a strategic retreat from the fort. General Patton then decided to leave an infantry battalion to surround the fort so that we could move on. The Germans inside the fort remained there for 3 months after the war ended, until they ran out of food, and then they finally surrendered. Following the battles for French liberation, the Battle of the Bulge was fought in Luxembourg with terrible losses during the coldest winter on record, for which we were poorly equipped. We had to cross the Sauer River, and my sergeant and I made reconnaissance with a white sheet over us so that the Germans couldn't see us against the snow. And we decided that the only thing we could do, I told my sergeant to stop and listen, and we could hear the Germans slushing through the snow on the other side of the river. So we knew they were dug in on the other side. General Patton, however, insisted that we build a footbridge against our recommendation. When we started putting, when the general tells you you're going to put a footbridge, you're going to put a footbridge, no matter what you say. When we got the footbridge halfway out in the river, the Germans threw up flares. This was in the middle of the night. They threw up flares, lit up the whole river there, and started throwing 88s and mortars, everything they had at us. The result was that I lost half of my platoon, and the footbridge was destroyed. Very fortunately, my life was spared by 2 infantry company commanders with whom I was coordinating, which would go first and which would go second. We heard an 88 cannon shell coming towards us. The 3 of us dropped to the ground. I was in the middle. They both were holding on to me. And unfortunately, they both were killed when the shell struck by our side. Because they shielded me, I survived and was evacuated to a first aid station in Luxembourg because of shell shock. During my stay at the aid station, the infantry was forced to cross in assault boats, as my sergeant and I had initially recommended. They then were able to establish a bridgehead on the other side of the river and kill practically all the enemy, and that turned the Battle of the Bulge in our favor. After the Battle of the Bulge, I had a week leave. I got to Paris, and I looked up Jacques. True to his word, we had a week together I will never forget. Many years later, my wife and I went to Montmartre, Paris, to look him up. We went to the old address that I remembered, but no one had ever heard of Jacques de Lyons, even the people that were living at the house during the war. It was a great disappointment to us, but our stay in Paris for that week was spectacular. We went to all the famous tourist sites, to the Louvre, and to spectacular flower and produce markets. At the end of the war, on May 8, 1945, we met the Russians in Winterberg, Czechoslovakia. It was only then, when we opened the concentration camps and prisoner of war camps, that we were faced with the unbelievable horrors almost impossible to internalize. Horrors that were kept from us while we were fighting. It reinforced the understanding that the destruction of Nazism had been an absolute necessity for the free world. During the war, I was able to manage with the French I studied in high school, but that was long ago and I've forgotten it. In closing, I wish to express my deep appreciation to you, Mr. Ambassador, and to your staff, and to read my poem that I composed, War is Hell. think you got, oh, it fell off there. Here it is. War is hell. On a landing craft to Normandy, a seagull pooped on my head. A lucky sign, you'll survive the war, a sailor said. His prediction was correct as it could be. How I survived the war was a great mystery. As combat engineers, we were often on the front lines. Being so exposed, we had close calls many times. With 25 river crossings often under fire, too many good men fell. I said they were lucky, as we still had to go through hell. Often I wished the next bullet would end it all for me. But the good Lord had other plans, you see. To have survived the war was against all odds, only made possible by the grace of God.